Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. Well, today I would like to, spark discussion by a continuation of our study of the Lotus Sutra. We're getting near the end of the Lotus Sutra proper. Last week we talked about the never disrespectful bodhisattva, the bodhisattva never disrespectful, who said very little, and what he said was always along these lines. No matter who he was talking with or what situation he was in, he would say, "I deeply respect you. I would never dare to be disrespectful or arrogant toward you. Why? Because all of you are practicing the Bodhisattva way and surely will become Buddhas." And the punchline of that chapter was that never disrespectful bodhisattva was a former life of our Shakyamuni Buddha. I guess, especially for those who have not been following this Lotus Sutra story from the beginning, it might be good to mention that it's an unusual form of literature. And it at first might be confusing or even off-putting. But it's not, I tend to look at it as similar to allegories we have in European or Middle Eastern culture. Allegories such as Pilgrim's Progress or Dante's Inferno. Stories that help guide us to some deeper truths. So with never disrespectful bodhisattva, for instance, when he was near death, it's said that it's indicated in the sutra that 200 billion verses of this sutra rained down on him, and he was able to accept them. Well, there aren't in the written text that we're looking at anywhere near 200 billion verses. So it suggests that the sutra we're reading and thinking about and studying and trying to understand points to something, the sutra beyond the sutra that is perhaps beyond words, that is in some ways ungraspable, or one might say incomprehensible. And yet, in some way, accessible for humans. So the next two chapters sort of wind down the story of the Lotus Sutra that we have been following. And then there are 6 appended chapters, some of which are interesting, and we'll talk about them as well. But today we'll be discussing a chapter entitled "The Divine Powers of the Tathagata," Tathagata being another name for Buddha. And I'll just dive right in, and then we'll make comments along the way. At that time, all the bodhisattvas, the great ones who had sprung from the earth, equal in number to the specks of dust of thousands of worlds, put their palms together in complete attention before the Buddha, reverently looking up at his face, and said to him, "World-honored one, after the extinction of the Buddha, in whatever lands the world-honored one is embodied, wherever he has become extinct, we will teach this sutra everywhere, Why? Because we too want to gain this true and pure great Dharma, to embrace, read, recite, explain, copy, and make offerings to it. Then the world-honored one, referring to the Buddha, revealed his great divine powers before Manjushri, one of the attendants there, and the other innumerable hundreds of thousands of billions of bodhisattvas, the great ones who had lived in this world for a long time, as well as monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, asuras, griffins, chimeras, pythons, humans and non-humans, and so on. Before all these beings, he extended his long and broad tongue until it reached up to the Brahma world, while light of immeasurable and innumerable colors radiated from every pore of his tongue, illuminating everything, everywhere, throughout the worlds, in all directions. Under all the jeweled trees, the Buddhas, seated on lion seats, did the same thing, extending their long, broad tongues and radiating immeasurable light. Some of the figurative language and metaphors used in the Lotus Sutra are unfamiliar to people more accustomed to European or Middle Eastern literature. And having the long, broad tongue is one of them. But the source for that, which makes this passage more comprehensible, is that a long, broad tongue is one of the 32 marks of a Buddha. So the 32 marks of a Buddha are physical findings, basically, that a Buddha's body has. And this can, of course, be taken literally, but more likely it is a figure of speech pointing to characteristics of the Buddha that are not physical. There is in the early Buddhist literature a sutta called the Lakkhana Sutta that explains the 32 marks. And I'll just read the section about this long, broad tongue. Monks, in some past lives, the Buddha was reborn as a human being. He refrained from harsh speech. He spoke soft, kind words, pleasing to the ear, lovely, going to the heart, polite, likable, and agreeable to many people. Due to performing these deeds, he was reborn in heaven. When he passed away from there and was reborn here as a human, he obtained these 2 marks. He had a large, wide tongue and the voice of a great Brahma, as sweet as the Kurawika bird's call. So this long, broad tongue is not so much a physical characteristic, but a representation of the Buddha's patterns of speech, his habits of speech, and the quality of his speech. Some of you may, some of you may wonder what a Kurawika bird sounds like, and the species that a Kurawika bird is thought to represent is the white-breasted water hen, by the way. And just as an aside, I can't resist this. It is possible, if this works, it is possible to hear the call. So it's kind of a sweet sound. The long, broad tongue was referring to the power of speech, the quality of speech of the Buddha. And the illumination resulting from that speech is addressed in another passage here. Thanks to the divine powers of the Buddha, all the living beings in these worlds, the gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, asuras, griffins, chimeras, pythons, humans and non-humans, and others, saw in this world the innumerable, unlimited, hundreds of thousands of billions of Buddhas seated on the lion seats under all the jeweled trees. And they saw Shakyamuni Buddha, together with abundant treasures, Tathagata, sitting on a lion seat in the treasure stupa. And they also saw the innumerable, unlimited, hundreds of thousands of billions of bodhisattvas, the great ones, and the four groups reverently surrounding Shakyamuni Buddha. Having seen this, they were all filled with great joy, having obtained something they had never had before. Many passages in the Lotus Sutra and in other sutras talk about joy, the joy of understanding, of gaining a glimpse of the Buddha's wisdom. And this may seem at first, especially to those exploring Buddhism and trying to understand it, may seem a little paradoxical because the Buddha's teachings are quite frank about how difficult life is. In his first teaching, he talked about the Four Noble Truths, which starts out with a discussion of the difficulties of life, how difficult it is, this old age, sickness, and death, this sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, being associated with those you don't love, being separated from those you love, not getting what you want, this tendency to cling to things that are unsubstantial and unreliable. So all this sounds, in a way, kind of grim. But the teachings go on to discuss how these difficulties that are inevitable can be transformed or transcended. One might think, if you've read The Grapes of Wrath, the last scene in The Grapes of Wrath, where you have the most dismal scene you can imagine in literature. And yet it is transformed by the literal milk of human kindness. So there is joy in these teachings. Even the recognition, the honest recognition of the difficulties of life is of itself a source of relief. So the chapter goes on. In brief, all the teachings of the Tathagata, all the unhindered divine powers of the Tathagata, the hidden core of the whole storehouse of the Tathagata, and all the profound matters of the Tathagata are proclaimed, demonstrated, revealed, and preached in this sutra. Therefore, after the extinction of the Tathagata, you should all wholeheartedly embrace, read, and recite, explain, and copy, and practice it as you have been taught. In any land, wherever anyone accepts, embraces, reads, and recites, explains, and copies, and practices it as taught, or wherever a volume of the sutra is kept, whether in a garden, in a woods, under a tree, in a monk's cell, or a layman's house, or in a palace, or in a mountain valley, or an open field, in all these places, you should put up a stupa and make offerings. Why? You should understand that all such places are places of the way. Emphasizing here that what's being discussed is not the sole property of a monastery or a temple, that what's being discussed is present everywhere, that there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas everywhere. So in a sense, it's liberating the Dharma, the truth of the Buddha's teachings, from the temple and making it accessible to all. After the extinction of the Tathagata, anyone who knows the sutras preached by the Buddha, their causes and conditions and proper order, will teach them truthfully in accord with their true meaning. Just as the light of the sun and moon can dispel darkness, such a person working in the world can dispel the gloom of living beings. Just as the light of the sun and the moon can dispel darkness, such a person working in the world can dispel the gloom of living beings, leading innumerable bodhisattvas finally to dwell in the one vehicle. Therefore, one who has wisdom, hearing of the blessings to be gained after my extinction, should embrace this sutra. Such a person will be determined to follow, without doubt, the Buddha way. We've discussed previously this issue of preaching the Dharma, which is sort of recommended for everyone, not just designated preachers in the Lotus Sutra, and what that really means. Obviously, talking to your uncle about the Buddha's long, broad tongue is not going to lead to understanding or illumination. But preaching the Dharma is best accomplished by example, by the example of one's life, how one lives one's life, because people notice such things. And these are the most important teaching devices we have, the example of our lives. So in this, that concludes the divine powers of the Tathagata chapter. The last chapter is very short, and I'll read a couple sections from it. In the future, if good sons or good daughters have faith in the wisdom of the Tathagata, you should preach the Dharma Flower Sutra for them, so they can hear and understand it. In this way, they can be led to Buddha wisdom. If they are living beings who do not have faith in it or accept it, you should use other profound teachings of the Tathagata to demonstrate and teach it, enriching them and giving them joy. If you do this, then you will have repaid the grace of the Buddhas. Finally, then, Shakyamuni Buddha had all the Buddhas embodying him, who had come from all directions, returning to their own lands, saying, Buddhas, go in peace. Let the stupa of abundant treasures, Buddha, be as it was. Throughout the course of the Lotus Sutra, it's floating in air above the ground, and it's to return to its former place. When these words were spoken, the innumerable embodiment Buddhas from all directions, who were seated on lion seats under the jeweled trees, as well as abundant treasures Buddha, superior practice, and the multitude of innumerable countless bodhisattvas, Shariputra and the other Shravakas, the four groups and others, four groups being monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, and all the human and heavenly beings, asuras and so on, in all the worlds, hearing the Buddha preach, were filled with great joy. So that concludes the main text of the Lotus Sutra. Scholars agree that the last 6 chapters were separate writings that were appended later. We'll discuss some of them. So the illumination of the Buddha's teachings. In this reading, it talked about how with that illumination, you could see Buddhas and bodhisattvas everywhere. You could see jeweled trees. You could see all the different worlds, all the different lands. So what do you think the illumination of the Buddha's teachings allow us to see? What do they allow us to see? I think I'll stop there, and we will break up into smaller groups for discussion, those who wish to stay, and I hope you all will. And then we'll get back together again for a few minutes at the end. Thank you very much for listening today.
So what's the question? Can you say a little more about your question?
Carol, that sounded like Carol. What does the illumination of the Buddha's teachings allow us to see in this world, in the world we perceive? I think I'll just leave it that open-ended.
Really?
And see what happens. Thank you.